Hey, world history. I ended the first half about the Middle East, and I'm doing a separate part about. I did the French kind of in the first one, and I'm going to do the British and the Middle East in this one. So remember, there's the secret agreement between the French and British, right in the middle of World War One, to control this part of the world even after the war, despite agreeing to, at least at the surface, to talk about independence for these places. They use this as an excuse to just gain more territory. Now, in world history, the Balfour Declaration of 1917 is important because it is the British government, and what they do is they support an establishment in a region of the world called the Palestine in the Middle East for a national home for Jewish people. I will show you a map of what this looks like in a second, but it's tied to this movement called Zionism. And Zionism is a nationalist movement that called for Europe's Jews and more broadly um, the world's Jews to move to their ancient homeland, which is quoted and talked about in the Torah, the Jewish holy book, and the Bible, the Christian holy book. And so let's kind of look. So that's the idea. And this is kind of in general that part of the world. You'll notice it's called Israel today, which is the Jewish nation state. And we will talk about the Israeli Palestinian conflict later in our learning. It's an important conflict, but the roots of it are here. And then here's the region of the world. And the Balfour Declaration calls for the world's Jews to leave kind of all their they call it the Jewish diaspora. There are Jews all over the world, and the idea is to call for them to go from all of the world to come and form a nation here, and the British government would help them do that. The problem is there are people living here already, and they are Muslim, and so the idea is that the British government thinks they can just move, hundreds of thousands of Jewish people into this area where there's lots of Palestinian Muslims and just form a nation under Jewish control. Who's not going to like that are the Muslim majority Palestinians. Before that, so Transjordan becomes a nation, fairly smooth, kind of an example of what was supposed to happen with these mandates after World War One. The British kind of keep stability, develop control until 1949. They gain full independence to Jordan, and it becomes the Kingdom of Jordan, or simply today, Jordan. Okay, that's kind of what these mandates were for, to help these places become independent nations. So here's Jordan on the world map in the Middle East. So Palestine, so this part of the world here. So again, there are Palestinian Muslims here. They're under British control, but Britain said they're going to allow the movement of Jews into here to form their own nation state. If that happens, we call it Israel today. There's a growing Zionist movement globally. British protection of area facilitated by Jewish migration en masse to this area. So Britain protects Jews moving into this area because of the Zionist movement. World history is filled for hundreds of years with people persecuting the Jews. And the idea is that if the Jews have their own homeland, they can have a nation state, they can be safe, they won't be persecuted by foreign governments anymore. And so Britain allows them and helps them to accomplish this. By 1933, 240,000 Jews live in Palestine, and there is that growing unrest and unhappiness among the Muslims, the Palestinian Muslims, who live there. They believe that the Jews benefited under British rule at their expense. In 1936, when the Nazis come to power in Europe, more and more Jews come to this area, and that religious and ethnic conflict between Jews and Muslim Palestinians, you see a revolt in 1936 against the British, and Britain puts down the revolution in 1939, but that ethnic and religious conflict is already starting to brew and build between those two different populations. Radical Zionists begin to arm Jewish militia in the area to both protect them against the violence of unrest of Palestinian Muslims, and with the idea that these Zionists want to eventually also get rid of the British and form an independent nation. So at its worst, radical Zionists begin guerrilla campaign against British rule. So right, even though the British protecting the Jews and allowing the Jews to come to this area of the world. The most radical Zionists want them gone so that they can form that independent Jewish nation. After World War II, there is generally a global sympathy for Jews because of the Holocaust, and many more Jews move into the British Palestinian Mandate, which again further stokes ethnic and religious violence. And by 1947, Britain turned to the UN for solutions. This conflict is still unresolved today, and we will cover this in depth later in our school year. In Iraq, after World War I, when Arabs resisted the French, Iraqis revolted against the British. Britain puts down the revolts. Remember, again, these people are looking for independent nation states, and these foreign powers continue to put them down, even as late as the 1920s, despite kind of the promises and hopes of independence after World War I, right? These European powers just don't let it happen. In 1924, under British control, there's a new constitutional monarchy, with Iraqis continually calling for independence from the British. 1932, Britain grants them independence, but before they go, they set borders with Kuwait, which many Iraqis disagree with, and there will be a series of conflicts in the Middle East between Kuwait and Iraq over these border disputes. In World War II, there are call among some politicians to come to a treaty with Nazi Germany. Britain responds by then reinvading Iraq and putting a pro-British government in power. That is it for the kind of the parameters of the lesson. Hopefully the big takeaways are the idea that like after World War I in this particular part of the world, right, there are independence movements among all these different ethnic groups, but because of the interference of Europeans, specifically the French and the British, they really just set the stage for longer term ethnic and religious conflicts, with maybe the worst being Israel and Palestine, which is important enough that we will spend a whole day on it in the future.